Welcome to the Balancing Act podcast. This is episode number 46. I'm Andrew Temte, and today we've got Simone Petrella joining us. Simone is a former colleague and is the founder and CEO of cybersecurity workforce development firm Cybervista. Thank you so much for being here, Simone.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to see you. You know, I left Kaplan earlier in the year, and Cybervista has always been a company that's near and dear to my heart. So, you know, thank you for all that you're doing to help make frankly, the world a safer place.
Yeah, one kind of bite of the elephant at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is our sixth and final episode in our mini-series entitled Nobody Wants to Think Anymore, which is an exploration of the often misunderstood skill of critical thinking. Today, we're going to, take the angle of technology and cybersecurity specifically, and along the way, we'll hopefully teach our listeners a thing or two about the world of cybersecurity based on your phenomenal expertise in the space. But before we get started, as always, please tell our listeners your story.
Yeah, well, I think my story will probably be applicable to our topic because, like many people who have been in cybersecurity for the last 15 years or so, I have no educational background or perspective or experience in the technical computer science or hard science world. I was an international relations major, and I went to undergraduate and I got a degree in international relations. And frankly, my entire world started because I was impacted by 9/11. I went to school in Washington, D.C. I was very committed to pursuing a career in national security and counterterrorism. And that's exactly what I went and did. I went and worked for the Department of Defense, predominantly focusing on counterterrorism and intel. And it was not until I was in grad school and after the fact that I essentially kind of bumped my way backwards into cybersecurity, mostly because I was working at a a defense contractor at the time, and they needed folks who had a analytic tradecraft background, so the intel community, and they were trying to apply a lot of the same principles around doing analysis of counterterrorism networks to information security and information assurance. The idea being that they're similar in that they're both transnational threats. They don't have traditional geographic boundaries. And so that's where my kind of foray into my story starts, is that I was a kind of trained intel analyst with a background in like Middle Eastern studies and international affairs and politics, and found myself in the world of computer network operations and information assurance somewhere around 2005. And so had to get a lot of my training and exposure and experience through on the job and learning it as I went. But also realized that in many ways, the skill set that I was coming into the workforce with was one that was actually harder to teach than if I had a kind of hard computer science or engineering background. And that's because ultimately we were responsible for writing and communicating reports for decision makers that they could do something with. And that meant you had to take technical information and translate it into something usable, which is kind of a blend of those two things. So, fast forward after doing that for the better part of a decade, I had the opportunity to, as I kind of lived on the forefront of building out cybersecurity teams for most of that time in my career, I had the opportunity to lead and kind of found a company, Cybervista, that's focused on this skills gap. And I could not take the leap. It's a challenge that is so near and dear to my heart because I lived it in my own personal career. I lived it with every single person that came into my door who would say, thank you for these 18 months of experience. Now I'm going to go work somewhere else for 30% more than I can, pay you here. And so this is not a new challenge. And to have an opportunity to kind of grow a business and tackle this really kind of chronic issue that we have around skills and workforce readiness has just been a complete honor.
How important was your international relations background to your success story, because I can see why not growing up with a hard IT background could have somewhat been something that was a challenge that you had to get over. But I would think that now that I hear you tell that story, that a lot of the international relations background and your global viewpoint would have really been a benefit. Do I have that right?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? But the story I tell, and I think that this is the nature of how things evolve. I think that gave me a perspective to put things into context, and that's ultimately, having come out of the intelligence community, that's ultimately what my job was always to do, was to help provide context around some of these major threats that were, attacking in the cybersecurity space, and sort of understand, like, how do you prioritize them? And I will never forget, because I think it was early 2006, and I was giving a briefing, to a number of military, at the time they were called the G6, which was the IT component of how, like, military is organized. And I'm giving them a whole kind of list of prioritized, like, here's who you have to worry about, that your threats, and this is what you're going to think about, how, kind of impacting your networks. And they laughed me out of the room, because they're like, if we see something bad, we just stop it. That was that was the perspective at the time. Whereas I'm sitting there going, you can't stop everything. So how you need to put some context into place in order to prioritize, because you don't have unlimited resources to do that. Right. And that's just become a bigger and bigger reality as the kind of, the internet's gotten everything more connected. Pretty much no company, no organization isn't a tech company on some degree. And you just can't do everything. So kind of context matters. That's kind of the big takeaway, I would say. And that's no less true in kind of the world of cyber than it is anything else.
Yeah. So I like to ask this next question of everybody, which is, what was that accelerant in your career? Was there just an aha moment that you had where the light bulb just went off?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a two-parter on an aha moment. I had started working in computer network operations space, again within the Intel community, and I obviously had left counterterrorism, and that was maybe the wrong terminology to do, but that was kind of that was like the sexy work to do at the time. Doing anything in information assurance was not, and so I clearly wanted to get back to it, but I was, by a mentor and one of my initial managers, was given the opportunity to say, you want to stay and do this full time? Like, let's grow this team. Let's do this. And I have this very distinct memory of going home and speaking with some family and friends in vague terms, obviously, because no one could ever knew exactly what I did. But, I was like, I don't know where this whole computer thing is going. Like, is this really what I want to do? But something told me it was, a great opportunity to kind of get an additional skill set, and it was really interesting, and I found it fascinating. And so I think that's kind of the groundwork. That was the aha moment. But the second aha moment was a year later, or even maybe a little over a year later. The U.S. government, through the kind of Director of National Intelligence, passed a massive billions of dollar initiative called the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. And so in that, I mean, if you want anything that kind of reinforces not only in priority around national priorities, but also in the money that flows down through it, it exploded. Like the industry, if you were on the DoD and the military kind of, industrial base side, cybersecurity became the thing to do. And so in many ways, I would say that was really the biggest moment, where all of a sudden it's like, this is national level attention. This is, all the way up to the president, a high priority action item. And, I had been sitting right there.
Yeah. Right place, right time, but paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're here to talk about critical thinking. We've already alluded to the concept several times in the setup here that we've done. But what does critical thinking mean to you?
I think critical thinking, and I say this as a former Intel analyst, comes down to one, the context. Context matters. And B, being able to organize and present that context in a way that helps make an actionable decision. So it's really linking all the chains of things into a reaction in order and be able to present that. So it's kind of taking disparate pieces of information, making an assessment, and being able to convey and communicate that assessment in the form of a recommendation. And that has to be compelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's the action piece that.
Yes.
So the context is important, but then the action piece that's really cool. What about a story or two of a time in your career when critical thinking was absolutely essential to either a success or the avoidance of a horrific failure?
Well, I guess maybe I'll answer the second question first. As I mentioned, I had a team of Intel analysts that were all focused on cybersecurity and protecting, in essence, the Department of Defense information grid. And that kind of spanned a number of things. And so in finding the right staff and the right people to fill those roles was a big challenge. One, because of the mission space. Two, because there was a clearance. And three, because people didn't really understand what does it mean to do analysis in the context of this somewhat technical field of study. And as it relates to critical thinking, I had a 0% success rate of taking someone with only a cybersecurity, computer science, or engineering background and turning them into an analyst. But I did have success turning people who had what I would consider to be very strong critical thinking skills. And by the way, this is not to say that computer scientists don't have strong critical thinking skills, but sometimes it's also desire. But people who had history, biology, journalism degrees, pre-law, and teaching them those technical skills in order to kind of get them to the point where they could actually produce reporting and deliverables that made sense. And so I think critical thinking is kind of a core component to the success of if you're going to do anything that's analytic in any field. Kind of having that starting point was the avoidance of kind of a complete failure, as well as the ability to make sure that we were successful in the types of recommendations that we were, ultimately making and presenting to our key customers.
Yeah. So during my time at Kaplan, Brandon Bastide and I would, we'd talk routinely about the liberal arts and how that terminology gets such a bad rap and needs a rebranding. But you're giving us yet another example of where the liberal arts can really be a strong gateway into careers that, on the surface, you would say, does A and B really go together? But at the end of the day, that liberal arts background really does matter.
Yeah. The other thing I will say, and I think that this is, I'll tell the story in terms of kind of the context of what I did, but I think it applies to the comment you just made, which is, when we would train new analysts coming on board, one of the things that was really important in all of the intelligence community, not just cybersecurity, is to understand the intelligence life cycle. And that's not only where do you get the raw information that you're using to kind of connect those dots and those different puzzle pieces and put them together and make an assessment, but it's also understanding what is the objective that you are trying to help move towards by kind of researching and providing a set of recommendations or analysis on that particular area. And that's an area, and that's even within the liberal arts where people can get very lost, because if they don't know, we want to achieve a certain objective, how do we think through this problem in a way that helps us execute on that? Because otherwise, it's very easy to get so down in the weeds that you learn a lot of interesting information, which is wonderful, but it doesn't actually help us kind of get to the end goal there. Or you just kind of move into a different direction and we have distracted ourselves from the objective that we were initially pursuing.
Right. So we have the distinct benefit here of, you've got this wonderful background, but you're also a chief executive. So I want to tap into that experience as well. So in your day to day as a chief executive of a very important business, what does critical thinking look like in action for you as a senior executive?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of understanding how to collect all the disparate information that I'm getting from the stakeholders internal to my company that want to achieve certain objectives. How do I distill those into things that can actually be prioritized? And also managing the expectations of our investors and the things that are, important to them from a business perspective. And ultimately that has to shake out into a set of priorities. And as I know you are aware of in your time at Kaplan, there's not unlimited resources to do everything we want to do when we think about that overarching vision. And so critical thinking is pretty much, I would say, like the number one thing that is just a constant requirement, because you're kind of balancing the amount of times it's like, it would be great if we did, initiative A. Wouldn't that be cool? And I would say, yes, they would to everything, but we can't do everything. And so being able to kind of take all that information and kind of make a determination on, okay, well, what's going to get us not only the best bang for our buck, but give us the best return or put us in the best position to position us for where we want to move, as we think about executing on our vision. Those are all things that are pretty much part and parcel of kind of my everyday role as an executive.
Well, thank you for punching that point, because I talk to young folks all the time that want to. I shouldn't say young folks. That makes me sound like I'm old, which I suppose I am in relative terms to some people. But I feel 21 today, so let's just go with that.
There you go. Stick with that.
Yeah, we'll stick with that. But I appreciate you really hitting that hard, because if you aspire, wherever you are in your career, to move up the ladder, to one day be the chief executive or in the C-suite, I agree with you. Critical thinking is either number one or very, very close to the top of the list. So thank you for that. So now, given your background in education and the cybersecurity spaces, what advice do you have for educators and as an extension, business leaders to move the needle on what, for lack of better terminology, we'll call critical thinking literacy across their organizations?
Yeah, and by the way, it is the number one skill. Like when we talk to employers and corporations and organizations, like, what do you need in your cybersecurity workforce? Soft skills, critical thinking, and communication are almost always the top three, not hard technical skills.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of emphasizes the point when you think about like what should educators be focused on. There's a lot of talk in our industry in cybersecurity around the fact that a lot of the jobs that are open, that are unfilled today, don't require an undergraduate degree. And that is true to a point. My kind of, foot stomp or my perspective on it is, it's understanding, if you are asking for a degree, why are you asking for a degree specifically? If it is a purely technical role, then, whether you want the degree from a level of training or expertise or whatever else it is, that's one thing. But if it's just generic, we want someone to have a BA or a BS or some sort of undergraduate degree. A lot of times what I hear when you start to dig into those conversations is it's actually about the kind of tangential skills that you acquire or the perspectives that you get through that undergraduate experience, which kind of end up getting wrapped up into this term of like critical thinking. It's, have you had to be put through your paces to sort of do a lot of research and find information and write it into a term paper? And can you communicate that and convey it to a professor? And have you been able to have an experience in working with group projects? So it's that sort of, it's like that whole experience that sort of gets distilled down into, we want a BA for this role, or we want a BS for this role. And I think that does a disservice to it on both the employer side, because it's like, what do you really want? what you're looking for are those intangibles that often come out of a 4-year degree program. And then as an educators, it's maybe less around the degree itself or the major. And it's more around what do you actually have, like what are your students getting exposure and experience in doing when they're with you for those 4 years? Because those are life skills.
Yeah, I wish we had another hour to talk about this, because you're hitting on something that's very near and dear to my heart, is that underlying why do we convince ourselves that the degree equals a strong portfolio of quote unquote soft skills. The two are, I think, correlated, but there's this. We face a throughput issue. They're just to get enough people into the workforce with the skills that we're talking about. Colleges, universities don't have the throughput to do that. So we need alternative ways to be able to show the acquisition of those the acquisition and the validation of those skills, and that's something that I'm working really hard on, and I know you are too. But it's a big deal for the relevance of humans in the workforce for the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's drill into the world of technology and cybersecurity now. What advice do you have so let's assume that you've got a cybersecurity professional sitting right in front of you right now. What do you tell them to hone their critical thinking skills?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing comes down to the concept, especially this is true in cybersecurity in particular, of what does it take if you have to present something as a business case for buy-in. So you, especially in our world of cybersecurity, you're a cost center, right? So there's kind of the business perspective, like you're not often thought of a revenue contributing part of the business. And so you're going to ask for money to do something at some level that someone's going to say, I'm going to get no money out of, and you're going to try and tell me by spending this money, it will save me some unknown amount of money I didn't lose. It's like a negative ROI or reverse ROI, right?
Yep.
That you can't calculate. And so, but that being said, trying to piece together, like making the case to say, by doing these things, these are important technically, but also in the context of the business, and understanding, I think, on the critical thinking, saying, how do you make the link between what you want to do from a technical or a security control perspective to what impact do you expect it to have on the business? What is it going to protect? Why is that more important than other things that you could have chosen to implement? Why is this the low-hanging fruit versus something that's maybe a longer-term initiative? And I think that's kind of true even for you don't have to, you can be at the more entry level. Everything is ultimately around making a business case, because you are trying to sort of show that you're going to make your position and the work that you're doing more effective.
So what I'm hearing you say is that storytelling and perfecting one's storytelling skills is essential and a stepping off point to really honing your critical thinking skills. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I've never thought of it as storytelling, but it is. That's a really good way to put it. That when you're trying to sort of make a compelling proposition around something, you are telling a story. You have to gain buy-in from someone, and that means that they have to buy into your story. They have to believe what you're saying. And then how do you make that compelling enough that they go, oh yeah, we really should do that?
Yeah. Storytelling is at the top of, if you forced me to sit down and create the top 15 skills of the future, storytelling would absolutely be in that list.
We should go back to the days of Homer and like Odysseus.
Yes, absolutely. So now you've got that same cybersecurity professional in front of you. What's the skill right below that? You already alluded to communication, so maybe you've already seeded the answer here, but what's another skill that's just absolutely essential for a cybersecurity professional to strengthen?
Yeah. So Communication for sure, but I won't rest on that laurel. So I won't let you give me the easy way out. Then the other one is collaboration. To be effective in a technology field and to be effective in cybersecurity, it is a incredibly collaborative world by design. But it's also, in order to actually have your security go from when you kind of first provision someone access to something through actually monitoring behavior on a network, those are usually different individuals, or you're dealing with different vendors. And so if you're not able to not only communicate and articulate, but work across those kind of functional specialty areas, you're not going to be able to achieve a more secure environment. Because if you don't know how to kind of work with your peers, then you're just going to either miss out on information, or you're going to miss the ball in certain areas. And so I'd say collaboration, without a doubt.
Yeah, who'd have thunk? We've got to learn to understand each other, and we've got to learn to work together through difficult circumstances. Gosh, it sounds like our politicians could learn something from this. Anyway, we're not gonna get political today.
I can tell you a story about it though from my consulting days, and it was in the commercial sector. I was working with a client that had suffered a major breach and gone in after the fact to try and figure out how they could sort of optimize their security position and posture and team to not only clean up what had happened, but prevent something as catastrophic as this had been moving forward. And what we found, just as an example, was that there were two cybersecurity teams, one that did vulnerability management. So that's kind of like looking at the inside of your network, saying like, where are the holes? Like, what do we know we have to fix? And then the other side was looking at the actual kind of monitoring of network traffic, saying, oh, here's things going in and out. Do we see any behavior that's wrong? They sat in the same kind of corridor of the building in a hallway directly across from each other. Not only did they not know that each other team existed in the other room across the hallway from each other, but their badges were not coded to access each other's rooms and workspaces. And so, like I kind of used to joke, like in the consulting world, like cybersecurity is a little bit like marriage counseling. It's like, you kind of got to know how to talk to each other first before we can start to fix any of your technical problems.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing up marriage counseling, because that was all of the human skills that we talk about. They are alluded to and discussed in different ways in marriage counseling, but it's amazing how the direct parallels that you can draw from the human to human counseling that you do with a loved one into the world of work. The parallels are just they're amazingly similar. But again, we don't have another hour to go into that.
Yes.
Yeah, but before we do go, just give us a little bit of insight into where Cybervista is going and how it's making an impact on a topic that keeps many of us up at night.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. And this has just been such a fascinating conversation. I think one of the things we're most excited about at Cybervista is that we're really to kind of your passion area, Andy, taking a look at kind of data and how can we use a measurement of the starting point of where someone is on hard skills, use that to provide recommendations and a prioritized kind of roadmap to where there needs to be upskilling relative to the role that they have to perform, right? So not just a generic set of skills, but if you're going to serve in a particular role within an organization, what does that need look like? What skills do you have to acquire and demonstrate? And then once you've actually kind of gone through, whether it is training, whether it is on the job experience, how do you use that same baseline data you remeasure and you start to actually chart progress over time? And the idea being that, we're working on that level mostly with organizations, and our clients are less around the individuals, but it's how can organizations and agencies and companies step up to be a more proactive participant in the skills that people need to acquire to be in the right jobs at the right place with the right skills. Because I think it's a sort of disservice to ask the individuals to sort of figure it out when the jobs are kind of being created on the fly in real time.
Right.
in the work on the work side, right? In the industry side, not the kind of training or the academic side.
Yeah. Well, that is just super cool. That I talk a lot about skill inventories and getting rid of the annual performance review cycle, weaving that into the flow of just day-to-day business, getting feedback, performance feedback in the flow of business, but replace the annual review with more of an annual skill inventory, skill gap conversation that leads to learning opportunities for the individual, because there's nothing that says, if you step back, there's nothing that says that I care more about you as an employee than if I actively invest in your future through education. So thank you for.
Yeah, exactly.
You've punched many points for me today. So, Simone, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Andrew Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting services. You can find us at andrewtemte.com as well. Please like, subscribe, and rate, and we will see you next time.